Good afternoon, and welcome to the Southern University Law Center, one of the most effective, inclusive, diverse, and community-centric law centers in the nation. I am Alfreda Tillman Bester, Special Counsel for Human Services at Southern University Law Center's Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative, as well as an adjunct professor. Today, we will be discussing the proposed constitutional amendments that will appear on our ballot on November 13th. I am joined today by Representative Mandie Landry, who is a member of the Louisiana House of Representatives from District 91, Moller, who is the Executive Director of the Louisiana Budget Project. Mr. Robert Travis Scott is having a bit of technical difficulty, but he will be joining us shortly. Ashley Shelton, President and Executive Director of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Dr. Melissa Flournoy, who is Chair of the Board of Directors and CEO of Louisiana Progress. And Taryn Branson, I believe, will be joining us. She is an attorney and community consultant with Southern University Law Center's Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative. But first, I would like to ask our dynamic, brilliant, and innovative Chancellor, John Pierre, to come and welcome our guests and attendees to Southern University Law Center.
Good afternoon. Thank you,
afternoon.
Professor Tillman. I want to welcome all of you to this wonderfully planned event that will talk to you about constitutional amendments. This is really important because we have to understand how the Constitution affects everything we do on a daily basis. Also, this is very timely because it comes 2 days before early voting, and we want to make sure that you are as well educated on these constitutional amendments as possible. So I want to thank the team from the Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative and all of their interactive collaborations with so many different people to make this happen, members of the legislature, leaders, policy leaders like Moller, Dr. Flournoy, I believe I see Robert Scott, also a very, very important policy leader in the state of Louisiana as well that will join us. And of course, Attorney Taryn Branson, who does great work with the initiative. So again, I want to thank you for joining. This has been a great series, and there's so much to be learned from this. And I really want you to walk away better informed, better empowered to make good decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chancellor, and thank you for your undying support of the Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative. We do what we do in large part because of the support that we receive from you. So thank you, sir. So before I get started, as a point of personal privilege, I want to encourage every person who is listening to us today, if you are eligible, to get vaccinated against COVID-19. You are not safe, and our community is not safe until we all have been vaccinated. If you've already been vaccinated and you're 65 years of age or older, if you are at high risk because of an underlying condition, or if you are at high risk because of your occupation, and you are currently eligible for a booster to further inoculate yourself from this deadly disease. Just please go get vaccinated. The life that you save may be your own. So we have an election that will be held November 13th, 2021. On the ballot are 4 constitutional amendments. And here in Baton Rouge, we have a city court judge and a family court judgeship on the ballot. Additionally, there's a renewal for continued support of the Capital Area Transit System, or CATS. We encourage all of you to go out and vote in this election and in every election. Often we hear people talking about an off election. There is no such thing as an off election. And those elections that are closest to you, those local elections, those are the ones that have the most impact on your life. So there's no such thing as an off election. And I often get in trouble for saying that. It is so important that you vote, because if you don't vote, you don't count. And I mean, literally, I don't mean you're not worthy. I mean, nobody is literally counting you. You have an opportunity one day to equalize your standing with every other citizen, and that's on election day. One person, one vote. The deadline to request the mail ballot from the registrar is November the 9th. The deadline to return that ballot, if you are going to do it by mail, the deadline, not just to return it, but for it to be received, is November 12th. So please don't wait. If you need to vote by mail, if you know you're going to be out of town, go get your ballot now and mail it in or take it back. Either way, we want to make sure that it gets there before November 12th. Early voting actually starts this Saturday, October the 30th, through December the 6th, except for Sunday. And although the 13th is election day, as we often say on our radio show Perspective, that date means absolutely nothing to most of the people that we talk to. It's early voting. Choose your weather, choose your day. And today, we bring you a discussion on the November 13th, 2020 election and the proposed constitutional amendments. I have to do things a little bit differently today because of the complexity of what we're discussing. So I'll take the amendments one by one, and I will ask each of our guests to expound upon each in the way that they feel best addresses the pertinent impact and the particular of each particular amendment. We're going to give each of you, because we got 4 amendments and I got a pretty big panel, I'm going to give each of you 3 minutes to talk about the amendments. And to our listening audience, to those who have joined us as attendees, we will have a question and answer period at the end. So if you would please put your questions in the chat, put your questions in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring those, and we will give you an opportunity, give our panelists an opportunity to respond to your questions at the end. If you are a lawyer, we have free CLE credit for you today. So I'll give you some directions a little bit later of how to get that free credit, but we do have we are approved for 1.5 hours of CLE. I want to start with Representative Landry, but let me just tell you a little bit about what this is about. I'm having issues with how we're here again, amending our Constitution, the most amended Constitution in the nation, to accomplish things that could very easily, in my opinion, in my very learned opinion, as a practicing attorney for 20 years, could very easily be addressed by statute. So Constitutional Amendment 1 would authorize the legislature to provide a streamlined electronic filing, electronic remittance, and collection of sales and use taxes levied within the state by the state and local streamlined sales and use, to provide for funding, duties, and responsibilities of the commission. This amendment tries to centralize collection of sales taxes by creating a new state commission to oversee the collection of sales taxes that fund public services in New Orleans and other parishes. It shifts accountability from local elected officials to an unelected state panel with rules that are to be determined at a later date. To be determined at a later date. State commissions do not always act in the best interest of cities and towns, such as when the State Bond Commission denied funding to New Orleans in retaliation for the city's decision to institute a stricter COVID-19 rules. So with all of that said, Representative Landry, I would like for you to go first and just talk to us a little bit about the necessity for these amendments to be, these actions to be in the form of constitutional amendments as opposed to statutes, and then about the substance of Amendment 1.
Thank you, Alfreda. Hi, everyone. I am Rep. Mandie Landry. I represent District 91 in New Orleans. And I'm just going to apologize. I can't be with you the whole time today. I have another one of these tonight, and I've been on quite a few of these amendment panels because what has been really good is to see the amount of people who are curious about them and who want to know more. So I'm really happy about that. To take a 10,000 foot view, the amendments are complex and they're not easy to understand. And I completely agree with that as someone who voted on them. So just to put a little nugget in your head, we're going to be working on some ballot readability issues next year. But that's one of the big issues that comes up is why are we voting on these seemingly arcane and complicated issues to go into our Constitution? And the fact just is that there's a lot of tax issues that are required to go through our Constitution or that people want to put into the Constitution so that it's hard to change them later. And there's a mixture of that going on in these 4 amendments. One thing, just to be clear for people on Amendment 1, the sales tax amendment, is no one's sales tax is going up or down. The numbers are staying the same. What is changing is who collects the amount. You've all probably gotten some mail from your representatives, like me or like some of my colleagues around the state, that it explains kind of from a both sides point of view. And there are some arguments for the people who are supporting the amendment. And the biggest one comes down to, I think we're the only state that collects sales tax like this. There might be one other one that does this. So there's a little something to be said for we are the only ones who still do something this way. And there's also some arguments that I've not quite seen proof of, but that a lot of sales tax is kind of left on the table for lack of good collection purposes. But as Ms. Alfreda said, the localities, I think we have 55 tax collectors in our state, are very nervous about losing the ability to collect the sales tax themselves. One of the biggest concerns is that they won't have that cash immediately on hand. And in a lot of our localities and municipalities, they run on a shoestring. And so they really need every dollar they can. There is also some concern about what the regulations will look like and what the commission will look like. And that's a valid concern if you don't know what it is. But overall, your sales tax is not going up. It's not going down. And if this does happen, it'll be at least a couple of years before the commission is put in place. So if it does pass, we still have a little time to work through some regulations and work through the statutes. But I think it's a very good question as to why are we voting on this? And I predict in the next decade or so, we'll have another come to Jesus, if you will, on our state constitution, because it's just completely unwieldy. So you're right about that.
Thank you so much, Rep. Landry. I do want, because you have to leave. Mm-hmm. I know that I said we would take them one by one, but if there's another amendment or amendments that you would like to address, please feel free to do that now, because I want to respect that you have to leave.
Sure, I appreciate it. So Jan from Budget Project, who I've already been on one of these with and will be on another one, will go into much greater detail on 1 and 2 in particular. But I just want to say about 2, it is as complicated as he's going to make it sound. There's a lot going on in it. And it's very unfortunate that Amendment 2, what it does is it removes one deduction from your taxes and pays for it by lowering taxes in other places. But it does so in a very complicated, in my opinion, unfair way. And so I think what you'll see with Amendment 2 is he'll talk a lot about the federal deduction. Right now, you can deduct your federal taxes from your state taxes in Louisiana. I think 3 or 5 states, again, not many states allow that. The reason it's not a great thing is it makes our budget unstable. And so that is actually a good policy that we should be looking at in the future. But unfortunately, on your ballot, it ties it to some very regressive taxation issues, which I know Ashley will also talk about at length. So just something to think about. Some of the policy and issues we'll be discussing today are not terrible. They're just not being handled in the best way. So it's good that we're talking about it now, and hopefully the train won't leave the station too fast on these amendments.
Okay. Thank you.
So I appreciate y'all for having me.
Thank you so very much. We really appreciate you taking the time.
All right. Y'all have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Jan, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Alfreda. And it's great to be here with friends, old and new and in between. So, the Louisiana Budget Project looks at state policy from the standpoint of how it helps or hurts low and moderate income families. That really is our focus. So we did an analysis of all 4 amendments, and I'll be clear on this. We are neutral on number 1. We kind of give both sides. And the reason we kind of stayed out of this is because this is really, as Rep. Landry noted, a trust issue between state and local governments, and really an issue for the business community, which is the one that has the most at stake here and has been pushing for this. Amendment number 3, I have to be honest, I didn't pay any attention to this when it was going through the legislature, and most of what I know about it, I learned from the PAR guide, and I went back and looked at some of the debate, but that is really not something we focused on much at all. Amendment 4, I think is probably a pretty good idea to give the legislature a little bit more flexibility in dealing with budget shortfalls when they do occur. Hopefully this is an amendment that they will never have to use. The one where we have been really involved as an organization is on Amendment 2, and where we have kind of come out in opposition. And I want to kind of explain why, because as Rep. Landry said, it does do one very good thing, which is to get rid of the federal income tax deduction. But I want to start with kind of how we see the flaws in the state tax structure overall. And we look at it as having 2 kind of fundamental flaws. Number 1, we don't raise enough revenue to support the needs of the state through our tax code, the way it's structured. You can take my word for it, or you can take the Legislative Fiscal Office's word. They did a study that looked at, what percentage of the state's economy goes to paying state taxes, and Louisiana is close to the bottom. And you can just look at our budget. We're in a pretty good budget year right now. We have more revenue coming in than we've had for quite some time, and we still have educators who are underpaid by $4,000 on average compared to the Southern average. We are hundreds of millions of dollars a year short of what we need to provide children with adequate, high quality childcare. Our universities are badly underfunded compared to their Southern peers. So I think by any measure, we are not raising enough revenue to support the needs of this state, and we lag behind other states. And second, the revenue that we do raise, we raise in a regressive fashion, meaning that the highest overall tax rates are paid by households at the bottom of the income structure, and the lowest overall rates are paid by those at the very top. This amendment, which I think is really well-meaning, and there are some people I like and respect on the other side of this debate, but it doesn't address those 2 fundamental facts. And in fact, it kind of cements them, the status quo in state law, and makes it harder to change. What this does, and let's start with kind of, and I hope I don't go over my 3 minutes, but when people go into the ballot box and they read this amendment, what they're going to read, and I'm going to just read it because I think it's important to say what it says. It says, do you support an amendment to lower the maximum allowable rate of individual income tax and provide by law for a deduction for federal income taxes paid? The average person who doesn't pay attention to the legislature reads that and thinks, I'm getting an income tax cut and I'm getting a deduction. What's not to like? What this in fact does is put in motion a package of 4 complex bills. And as Rep. Landry said, You are getting rid of this one big deduction in state law that's been in our Constitution for many, many years and costs us, up close to $900 million a year. But the price for getting that deduction out is big cuts in the rates to personal income taxes, big cuts in the rate to corporate income taxes, a substantial cut in the corporate franchise tax, and a constitutional cap in the maximum allowable personal income tax rate. So it basically does those four things. When you add all these things up, what you end up with is, and I know the sponsor worked very hard to make it revenue neutral. They didn't want to raise taxes. They didn't want to lower taxes. In fact, it does lower revenue when this all comes out by about $27 million a year, which isn't an enormous amount in the context of a $10 billion general fund, but it is a tax cut. It's more than twice what we spend on the Department of Veterans Affairs every single year. So we do we do cut revenue available for appropriation. It also includes, and the legislature put in at the last minute, what's called a trigger amendment, which says not only does it lower income tax rates, but it says if we have a really good economic performance, if the economy does much better than expected, then there's an automatic trigger for additional across the board tax cuts. So even if Louisiana has a huge economic boom and the government has more revenue, the claim on that is not going to be let's finally pay our teachers or bring our universities up to their the level of their peers, but we're going to have more tax cuts. Finally, while it does eliminate the federal deduction from the state constitution, it would still allow that deduction to come back in state law if the legislature chose to do so. So the legislature could have made this amendment to kind of forbid the federal income tax deduction. They didn't do that. And then finally, and I just kind of question the premise of doing this, which is, and you'll hear from folks that say, well, if we do this, we're going to rise in the rankings, and we're going to no longer be seen as a bad state for doing business. These
30
are
seconds,
rankings,
Sean. 30 seconds.
I'm almost done.
There goes John.
But the premise is that if we can just go up on, get ranked higher by the Tax Foundation, which is a very conservative think tank, then people are going to flock to Louisiana, and it is going to help business. I simply don't think that's the case. That is the same case we were told by Bobby Jindal 13 years ago, who said if we can just rise to number one by the Center on Public Integrity on Ethics, then business is going to flock in. We fundamentally think that the way to attract business, the way to grow as a state and grow our economy is to do the fundamental job of educating people better, having safer communities, and doing the basics right. And that requires a stronger revenue structure that we have today, and this takes us in the wrong direction. So that's the end of my rant. I'll turn it over to...
Well, you know that I know your passion, and so I'm very pleased with it. You are very consistent with your passion. We did go into proposed amendment 2, and I want our audience to know that was more about proposed amendment 2 compared as opposed to amendment 1, which I would like for us to stay focused on that one before we go back. So Jan, you'll have another opportunity to talk about 2.
I don't know if I have much more to say on number 2.
You didn't have much more to say. So we're going to go back. We're going to go back to 1. And I'm going to ask Mr. Scott if he would give us his comments on amendment 1.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Is my audio working well enough for you to hear me okay?
It's
good,
perfect.
Good. That's great. I had to reboot to get this thing going. Again, Robert Travis Scott with the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. And a lot of you know PAR because every year when we have these doggone amendments on the ballot, we put out a PAR guide, which is a guide to the amendments. We don't tell you how to vote in that PAR guide. We give you the pro and con arguments and the appropriate background. We have the long version and the mini guides, and you can go to our website at parlouisiana.org, parlouisiana.org, and look that up. So the PAR guide this time around does what we usually do and gives you sort of both sides of each issue. And I have to disclose, PAR has for many years advocated the kind of changes that are taking place in 1 or 2. So when I speak about these, I'm going to be speaking about in favor of 1 and 2. We're very pretty neutral on 3 and 4, but I'll be glad to explain those amendments to everybody and what the impact I think is going to be. And I really appreciate the remarks by you, Alfreda, and Representative Landry about how complicated our doggone Constitution is and how littered it is with amendments. And we totally agree that that is one of the problems. And that's one of the reasons we're here, is because there's so much detail in that Constitution that when you want to make changes, you have to go to the people for a change in the Constitution in order for that to happen. So maybe one day we'll have a simpler, more foundational Constitution. But until that day, we're going to face the facts that we have today and discussions like we have today. Really happy to see John Pierre on here a little bit earlier. With Southern University Law Center. John Pierre was on the tax advisory group going all the way back to about 2011, 2012. And that tax advisory group, which he was a part, endorsed the idea of what we're trying to do with amendment number 2. And certainly they were concerned about the issues amendment number 1 as well. So if you want, you want me just to talk right now about amendment number 1, I assume. So
yeah, and if you get done quicker, it's okay. We'll just move on to the next person, then we'll come back around to 2.
Yeah, I'll just give a little bit of overview on it. I mean, obviously, as everyone has said, we have an extremely complex, tax system, sales tax system in Louisiana, and it's one of the problems with it is in the Constitution. It says that each parish will be its own collector of the local taxes. And the local governments have always been very concerned about this because Louisiana's local governments get a lot of money from sales tax as opposed to other local governments around the country that get proportionally more usually from the property tax. So we're kind of more dependent on the sales tax, which is more volatile and it doesn't do as well under economic hard times. I'd love to see us make a switch in that one day, but basically they are very concerned about losing their cash flow. And so they've been very reluctant on the local government level to sort of give up the right to be the chief collector. And the Constitution says they are going to be the collectors for their local tax. So if we want to make a change and make a streamlining system, we've got to change the Constitution to do that. Basically, what this constitutional amendment number 1 does is it creates a commission, and the commission will collect taxes both for state purposes and local government purposes, remit those back out, and it'll also be a policy forum because right now you could have different interpretations of tax policy and what's transactions from one parish to the next and with the state government. And this will hopefully put us everybody on the same page. But I think the most important thing it does is we have to remember that this amendment was really brought as a proposal by the local governments. I know a lot of people are concerned that we're taking power away from the local governments. I think you have to look at it in a different way at what the reality is. And that's that eventually we think probably, and a lot of people in local government think, the courts are eventually going to come in and say, Louisiana has a really unfair system. You're treating companies outside the state differently from companies inside the state. There are a lot of other potential constitutional issues with what we're doing, a lot of disputes that are going to come up. This amendment gives local governments the opportunity, gives them the chance for them to set up a centralized sales tax system or a streamlined system that they can control, that they can have a lot of input in. This is their chance to try to create a centralized system that will work as something that they can feel comfortable with. And my gosh, the safeguards written into this are tremendous, both in the constitutional amendment itself, and I believe you're going to see the same thing. Even if we pass this amendment, you are going to have statutes that have to be implemented with a 2/3 vote of both the Senate and the House in order to put it through. That's the comfort level at which we are dealing with this. And so I think let me just mention one other thing. The governor is also in favor of this. He said, and he has said, the governor has said, number 1, will create a framework for centralized sales tax collection. We're one of the few states that doesn't engage in sales tax collection in this fashion. is something I support. And that was a big effort to reach out to parishes and municipalities to get their support on this approach, because that's what's been lacking in the past. And their support was there, and it passed the legislature with 2/3, and it is something I support.
So Robert, we're going to, of course, reserve questions for the end, but while you're there and you're talking about there being a framework put into place, if they took the time to put this in a constitutional amendment, don't you think that they should have defined more what those processes were going to be and what this commission was going to look like?
That probably would have been my recommendation, and along the way, I would have encouraged them to do that. However, I do think you'll find that this particular constitutional amendment has so many safeguards that they did put in. There's a lot of detail in this amendment, a lot more detail than you usually see in a constitutional amendment. And so the first thing to do was to set up the protections for the local government so they feel comfortable about it. And then we can move into the phase of actually running this out. The truth is, it's going to take years to get together and figure out this new centralized collection system. And we didn't want to go through all that work, not knowing if the people are going to approve it. So I think it's probably a good idea. Yeah, it would probably be better in most cases when we have constitutional amendment. I'd rather see that statute and see how it's going to be implemented. In this case, we have an unusually detailed amendment, and we also have, an opportunity for people to really work through the details with a huge safeguard of a 2/3 vote in the legislature to try to keep everybody in a comfort zone. There's going to have to be a lot of agreement in order for this thing to go forward.
Thank you so much, Robert. Ashley, you're up.
Well, I was going to say good morning, but good afternoon.
Yes.
So, Ashley Shelton, very happy to be here on the President and CEO of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. And, and we actually came out against Amendment 1. And, and I think, me and Jan and Alfreda, we've all been on a number of different panels talking about this. And so, and so I think for us, the issue is, there are a couple of things. One, that, I think that what do I want to say? I think that if history were not what it was, right? And that I believed in all, unicorns and rainbows, which, I mean, rainbows are real, but I don't know about the unicorn part. But, that we hope that this commission is going to do the right thing and act in the proper ways. And I think that for me, there's a couple of things. One, moving the voter, who's ultimately accountable. This commission is not an elected body. It is a body that is set forth in this constitutional amendment of who the members most likely would be, but at the end of the day, it removes the voter one step back from being able to actually hold someone accountable. At least if it's your mayor, your city council, your sheriff, it is actually someone you elected, and it is actually someone where there is some pathway to some level of accountability. And I think with this commission, that's concerning. It's again, why are we putting one more group in between voters and and elected leaders in their community? And I also think that, one of the other reasons that, that this is, problematic is that, I think that everybody's talking about good government, right? And it's time, we need to streamline. I completely agree. But, good government's also accountable government. And I think it's really problematic that, the legislation that will actually move this commission forward the implementation legislation doesn't even happen until next year. And so we are enshrining something in the Constitution, but the implementation of which we won't, further discuss and talk about and put into place until next legislative session. And yes, there's lots of opportunities for good things to happen. And, and there's also opportunity for, for Louisiana to do what Louisiana continuously does, which is to not always make the best decision for the people of the state of Louisiana. And so for us, again, we understand that, that this is an issue that, businesses are having to, file, taxes with multiple agencies if they have a business in multiple parishes. For our smaller businesses, we understand that this is an issue, but I do think that there are the solutions that exist that we have not explored. And yes, this has been a constitutional issue since the last constitutional convention. However, I do feel like, I think folks are saying this is our last chance to get this right. If we got this on the ballot, I think we can get get a solution that actually meets the needs of all of our communities across the state, and get beyond a framework, but a framework where there is actually clear accountability, around how and when these dollars will turn over. And I think that, I think for, Power Coalition, one of the reasons we took this on is because it does have some hints of preemption, right? Like that we would all hope that, the tax dollars would be received by this commission and then immediately turned back over to those, to those localities and municipalities. But again, if what the bond commission, did a couple of months ago is any indication of what can happen, right? When other people are making decisions about a specific city, or making decisions about a community outside of those elected leaders that are trying to move any number of multiple initiatives, it certainly is concerning to us that I just feel like we've got to go back and get it right, like that we've got to do the harder work and actually bring a constitutional and enshrine something in our constitution that actually makes sense and fully solves the problem, versus versus kind of where we are, where we're going to create a commission, and then we're going to talk about the implementation, policy at the next legislative session. And so, for us, that's been the major concerns, and certainly with our larger metros, all being led by mayors of color, there are lots of questions for me. And so I'll leave it there, because I know we've got plenty of constitutional amendments to go, but that's kind of where we've landed on this. And, we had a very spirited debate with Clancy Dubois about about the history and, all in the Constitutional Convention and all of those things. But I do think that there are several solutions and several opportunities to bring this back and get it right and bring it back to the people, so that we actually completely fix this problem and not create one more layer of bureaucracy that isn't accountable to anyone.
So Ashley, that's time. And y'all, when y'all hear that little bell go off, that means that you're and I know it's hard to stop because you're in the middle of a thought, and I'm going to try not to, to limit your discourse. But I do want to ask one thing, Ashley, because the constitutional amendment itself required a 2/3 vote of the legislature, but the enacting legislation, the statute that would put this into place and put the meat on the bones, does that also require a 2/3 majority? And Robert's shaking his head that it would also require a 2/3 majority. That's a little bit of comfort, but I'm going to stop right there because I'm not on the panel. So we're going to go to Dr. Melissa Flournoy with Louisiana Progress. Melissa.
Thank you, Alfreda, and I want to agree with both Robert and Ashley. And so here's the problem. The devil's in the details. I think a lot of folks will agree that centralizing sales tax collection has a benefit to businesses working at the local level, businesses working in multiple parishes, out-of-state businesses wanting to do business in Louisiana. And so it seems like, Louisiana, we can make anything hard. And my biggest concern, and I think the concern for Progress about this particular amendment, is that the actual implementation legislation, as far as I know, is not drawn, Robert, and I don't think people have seen sort of the implementation plan. I think there's concern about the role of a commission or the need for a commission in this. I'm concerned that we're just going to draw out the process of centralizing sales tax collection over a multi-year complicated process. And we've made it harder than it needs to be. I share Ashley's concerns about sort of the track record of the Bond Commission and others and access to the collection of revenue. Are we ceding the process of collecting revenue to this new commission without a standard or expectation for access to those funds, particularly for some of our smaller parishes and jurisdictions that are collecting tax revenue? So I actually appreciate the spirit and the intent of this amendment, but I don't think it actually accomplishes the final objective in a timely fashion. I think it creates a lengthy, complicated process that requires too much on legislation to be pursued in the future, when in fact, I think there's a simpler way to do this. You could pass essentially authorizing legislation to allow each parish that can now legally collect taxes to name the Department of Revenue as their by proxy collector of sales taxes, according to a conversation I had last week with some folks. My concern is that we're making it too hard. There are no guarantees for local government. There are too many potential pitfalls for politics in these next two phases of implementation. And so I have a real concern that once again, this is a constitutional amendment that looks like it's solving a problem, but may actually be creating 2 or 3 other additional problems. And so that's why I am wary about this. So if this passes, then I think the advocacy needs to go towards ensuring that the implementation legislation is effective and clear and useful and timely. If it doesn't pass, I think it gives us another opportunity to talk about more streamlined opportunities for sales tax collections. So once again, the devil's in the details. The idea is the right idea to try and improve sales tax collection, but we don't want to create another layer of government that's going to make it more difficult for sheriffs, municipalities, and other jurisdictions that have sales taxes to actually do their work.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate that. Now we're going to go to Attorney Taryn Branson, who's an attorney with the Southern University Law Center's Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative, and also our community consultant. Taryn, welcome to the panel.
Thank you all so much for having me on today. And I really just kind of want to echo a lot of the same sentiments that the other panelists have already mentioned. And I want to really just kind of talk about the amendments from the community standpoint, if you will. When you're looking at the First Amendment, first off, I'm thinking about the average Louisiana citizen that's going into the voting booth. And we have to really consider literacy rates in Louisiana as well. That's not something that we can just, put aside in considering looking at these amendments themselves and the readability of the amendments. And so just like one of the other panelists, I really want to take the time to read the First Amendment. It says, do you support an amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for the streamlined electronic filing, electronic remittance, and the collection of sales and use taxes levied within the state by the state and local streamlined sales and use tax commission, and to provide for the funding duties and responsibilities of the commission. And so when you think about all of these convoluted, this really long, kind of almost run-on sentence, and how the average voter is really able to break that down and to really even understand what is being asked and then what is being done. Oftentimes with these amendments, no means yes and yes means no. And when we think about how these amendments are written, how they are structured, can the average voter really and truly understand what is being asked? And then moving forward with, the discussion of what the other panelists have said, mainly what Ms. Shelton spoke about, is accountability. Once these amendments are then voted on, and if this commission does come into play, this amendment is adopted, how can voters really and truly feel like their voices are heard? Is it that they would then have to go and redress not only the legislature, but the commission as well? How do we ensure that voters really and truly feel like they can express their ideas of what they feel like is an issue with whatever system they be? Granted, there will likely be mostly businesses who would, address the commission, if you will. But even still, considering the tax structure in our state, and as Rep. Landry mentioned, also this idea of trust. Can we really trust individuals to really and truly do what it is that we put them in positions to do. And so most often we look at certain communities who are left out. We look at how easily it is for certain communities to really not have their voices heard. And so at the end of the day, how much trust can we have in not only the commission itself, but in the ability of the legislature, commission, other powers that be, to really and truly voice the concerns of people in the state related to this amendment.
Okay, so if y'all can believe it, the lawyer on the panel was the only one that got under her 3 minutes. But Taryn, I thank you so much for your comments, because y'all, this is what happens when you have a former educator turned lawyer. She looks at the run-on sentences and she looks at the amount of time and the literacy level. And so that is so critical. I mean, it's something that we don't talk about because we don't want to be offensive. But even those of us who are lawyers, we read that and we don't know what we have to go and get the Black's Law Dictionary and get our statutes out and look at it to see what it actually means. And so that's a very important point. So one of the things that we always try to do is to encourage people to learn about the amendments before and know what it is that you're going to be voting on. So whenever you get to the polls, you'll be able to go in, make your selection, and you don't have to worry about reading through it while you're there. You just have to look at the number. But thank you all so much. We did a good job, I think, on Amendment 1. So I want to move on to Amendment 2. And Taryn, I'll start, if you don't mind, I'll start with you on Amendment 2. If you start, I'm just going to do it backward, y'all.
Okay, so on Amendment 2, and it's really nice to put a face with a name. And so I have often used the PAR guide whenever I myself am going to the voting booth to really and truly understand these amendments. On the first one, even with the background as an education and teacher, I really had to, read that twice in order to understand it and to digest it. And then on the second amendment, I believe that was Mr. Scott that read it already. But really and truly, in Louisiana, I really think of the issue of taxes and how our money is divvied up in terms of how much, and I really even hesitate to use the word luxury can we afford. And what I mean by that is when we think about Dr. Bester, Dr. Flournoy, Ms. Shelton, Mr. Moller, Mr. Scott, whenever they're riding down the highway in their fancy cars, and if they hit a pothole, will there be money available to fix the pothole so that their vehicles aren't damaged by the roads that they drive on? And so when we think about, moving one pot of money and moving, a deduction here to make up for something else elsewhere, does that really help? Does that really help us? And I'm really trying to, give the comments today from the standpoint, of the community consultant position and how I would really kind of speak in terms of these amendments to someone who would come into our office, asking for help. And so when we think about, individual taxes, when we think about, deductions and things like that, yes, at face value, it really does seem like, the average person is really getting something extra, if you will. But at the end of the day, how much extra are they really getting if they are trading one thing for another? And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Taryn. But she's doing really good on time today. I don't know I didn't get that class in law school to learn how to be brief, right? But Taryn, I want all of the panelists to address this particular issue. But what concerns me is locking in a rate, because we have the 4.75 that's there, that's in the amendment itself. And what if we need to adjust it? Do we need to amend the Constitution in order to adjust that rate of 4.75? Because when there's a need in the state, you adjust up, adjust down, but every time you want to change it, you have to do a new constitutional amendment.
And really, truly, essentially, therein lies the problem. In preparing really for today, I had the opportunity to really kind of read through the PAR guide additionally. And I was floored to learn that, Louisiana literally has almost 300 amendments, compared to the US Constitution, which has 26, if I remember correctly. And so when we think about how much we really have to continue to go to the voting booth in order to adjust something. Louisiana is a very, very, very unique state. We can be literally up one quarter, 1 year and literally down the next. We see that we have, so many natural disasters. Literally, there's so much that goes on within our state, and we really and truly need that flexibility in order to adjust, in order to, make amends for the things that we really need in order for our state to function.
Thank you so much, Taryn. Melissa, I'm coming to you.
This is another one of those constitutional amendments that I think we're actually trying to do too many different things in. Jan and I have talked for years about the excess itemized deductions and removing the federal deductions and all of that. And I think that's a good thing. But I also think that Taryn hit the nail on the head. I don't think we need to be putting the tax rates in the Constitution. And the other thing that sort of aggravates me is sort of this Bobby Jindal-ish focus on where we fall in the rating. So part of the rationale behind this wanting to recalibrate the income tax rates is so we'll move up on some ranking. And so I appreciate Jan mentioning that. So, I'm just very concerned that, once again, we're trying to look for ways to minimize the revenue for the state, to lock in sort of ways to lower taxes in the most complicated way possible. And so I agree that I think once again, the devil's in the details. If you want to eliminate the federal itemization, I don't think you need a constitutional amendment to do that. Do you, Jan?
I'm sorry, if you what?
Do you need a constitutional amendment to remove the excess or to change the excess itemized deduction?
No,
not excess itemized deduction, but you would need it to remove the federal income tax deduction because that is in the Constitution, and we're one of only 2 states that has that full deductibility. There are some states that have partial deductibility.
So I guess my concern is that we always want to do too many different things in one constitutional amendment. And so I would be for taking out that piece of the puzzle, but I would be against sort of lowering the tax brackets and putting in the tax brackets in the Constitution. And so I know that politics is the art of compromise, and I know that there are a lot of folks on both sides of this equation. But once again, I'm just really, and I think Jan said it really well, that Amendment number 2 doesn't really do what is in the best interest of Louisiana moving forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Melissa. So I just don't understand why we have to continue with the austerity, right? If we get $1 over, we're going to cut taxes, but we never have enough money to do any one thing, and that has really hurt us as a state and actually as a nation. So let me just add one more housekeeping thing. If you are a lawyer and you are seeking CLE credit, please put your name and your bar number in the chat as a private chat. You can put it as a private chat to me, or I'm sorry, you can put it as a chat to the panel. The panelists, and we'll get your personal information about that. So thank you so very much. And I'm going to go now to Miss Ashley Shelton.
Yes, so we stand with the budget project on constitutional amendment to. I do think that they're trying to do too many things with one piece of legislation, and I also have a little post-traumatic stress around these trigger amendments. And what they've done in the past and what happens, and that this particular one, like that, we are definitely, because of ARPA funds, and hopefully we'll soon get some additional federal dollars for Hurricane Ida. We're definitely going to see revenue rise in the state because of these the influx of these federal dollars. And so so it's not like the legislature has to vote. I mean, it automatically triggers. And so at the end of the day, all of those things seem problematic. And again, if we ever want to, if we ever want to move out of this space where we're at the bottom of every good list and the top of every bad list, we've got to have revenue in our state that can address things like that can do the things that are necessary for our state to be better, right? If we're going to talk about early childhood, if we're going to talk about teacher pay, if we're going to talk about some of these additional things, if we're always in the position where we are lessening the revenue that's available in our state, then I think we just stay in this this never-ending loop that feels stagnant, that feels frustrating, that feels just feels like we keep doing the same thing, and now we want to enshrine it in the Constitution, which again, I have a problem. I have a problem with that, and so we stand with the budget project on constitutional amendment 2, and just again, I feel like we need to go back to we need to take another bite of the apple and do it right, and maybe not try to do 5 different things with one constitutional amendment. And also too, one other thing I'll raise is that it is problematic the way that it's written, because if you read constitutional amendment 2, it does not seemingly truly tell you what all you are voting on as a voter in the state of Louisiana. And so I also raised that too as a concern. And so for us, it's a no. I certainly respect my friend Robert Scott and Parr and again, they've always been a great leader on making sure that the public had access to this information and how we understand it. But on this particular one, it's a no for us.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And now that you've called out Robert, we're going to ask you to speak to Amendment 2 and respond to what Ashley said about the amendment.
Sure. Well, I'm with the Democratic governor on this one. He very much laid down guidelines of what he wanted to see. The legislature was constantly in touch with him, legislative leaders, about following those guidelines. It came out as something that he supports. And he said, with respect to income tax, both personal and business income taxes, I think it's important that we do what we do to trade exemptions for lower rates. And that's what this does. With the federal income tax deduction, we actually outsource how much revenue we get in Louisiana to Congress. Because if they cut taxes, we get more. If they raise taxes, we get less if we need to be in control of ourselves. This is a revenue neutral way to accomplish that, and it will have less volatility to Louisiana. So I do support both. I urge voters to take a strong look at it and ultimately to vote in favor of Amendments 1 and 2. And I think one of the reasons he's in favor of it is because anybody will tell you sitting down with this who studied it, that this is a more fair system if you create it. It's a more simple system if you create it. Certainly, I heard Melissa say it was more complicated. I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's definitely more simple if you get rid of a deduction and have a rate and you know what your rate is. And it creates more stability. It creates more stability and revenue neutrality, both for the taxpayers themselves and for the state government revenues. On both ends, I think they get it. And there's been a lot of comments about the individual income tax part of this. It says it's a terribly regressive system. The Legislative Fiscal Office has studied this in a 35-page volume and has broken this down. And when you get rid of the excess itemized deductions, you get rid of the federal tax deduction, it turns it into a more progressive system. That is the words that they use, and that is the analysis that they've given. And not only this time, the Legislative Fiscal Office has been studying this issue for a long time, as have economists and tax experts from all stripes, not just conservative ones, and have said that this is the case. So it doesn't make a major move. We already have a fairly progressive individual income tax system. This makes it a little bit more so. There will be some winners and losers in this. And, you know, when you look at the great majority of people are hardly going to see any change in their individual income tax that they're going to pay. It's going to be pretty revenue neutral to them, just as it will probably be to the state. But you are going to have some people, especially on the higher end with that excess itemized deduction, and those tend to be the wealthier people who probably are going to pay a little bit more. So basically, I'm with the governor on this one. It makes things a little more progressive, makes it simpler, makes it fair, makes things more stable for the state. And I think stability is a good thing for all the causes that y'all are talking about.
So Robert, before you go, are you concerned about enshrining that rate of 4.75 into this constitutional amendment?
You know, it isn't the way, well, PAR would not want a rate, you know, the rate, there's already a rate in there, okay, is 6%. And a constitutional amendment that you're putting in here would put a cap at 4.75. The actual implementation is at 4.25. I think in order to get it passed, they had to put a rate in there, or else people were concerned that it would, you know, that government would go wild, you know, with that. But our usual recommendation would be, don't put a requirement for the federal tax deduction in there. Leave it up to the legislature to decide what to do that. That's what this amendment does. It doesn't say yes or no on that. It says, we're not going to have this in the Constitution. We're the only state in the country that has a constitutional provision requiring a federal tax deduction. There are only 3 states that require it. Iowa just got, actually, Iowa's only 2 states. Iowa just got rid of it because everyone's realized this is not a good idea. You need to get rid of this Washington wagging you back and forth, you know, every few years. Alabama is the only other state that continues to do this. So we have an opportunity to get rid of this thing, and I think it's an opportunity we ought to take.
Alabama, now that's a role model for you. Jan?
Yeah. Let's get away from them. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, Charlie says Big Bama.
Well, I don't have much to add that I didn't say before. I apologize for jumping the gun on number 2.
Nope, you were good.
I was never very good at following directions in school, and I guess I haven't learned in my old age. I want to say, Robert is right with respect to stability. I mean, the one argument I would make if I was kind of putting on my old reporter hat and doing both sides analysis is, getting rid of the federal income tax deduction does make us less vulnerable to changes at the federal level. But I want to talk about this, the legislative fiscal office analysis. What Greg Albrecht showed, it is true that, and he broke it down, and it is a 37-page report that slices and dices the impact in as many ways as you could want. I mean, you could spend hours looking at the spreadsheets he put in there. It is true for folks at the very, very top, the top 1% of taxpayers would on average pay a little bit more in personal income tax. So it would, in that sense, it would make it very, very modestly progressive. What it would do is for most taxpayers and most folks in the kind of upper middle income ranges, if you don't itemize, which is about 90%, you would get a small personal income tax cut. If you are in the 8% or so of people who itemize, your taxes would go up. And those are the folks who are going to go to the legislature and beg them to put back the federal income tax deduction if this passes. There's 100% chance that there would be a lot of pressure on the legislature to do that, and so you could end up with kind of the worst of both worlds there. But what makes our tax system so regressive is, we already are very low on a per capita basis on personal income tax, and there are 39 states that have a personal income tax, and we are like 3rd or 4th from the bottom in the per capita collections. We are extremely high on sales tax, and that's what makes our system regressive. We are 2nd from the top. That's not the state sales tax, that's combined state and local. And what we have, even though we are in a good budget situation right now is not going to stay that way forever. And so in a couple of years, we have a 0.45 portion of the state sales tax that is getting ready to roll off. That's going to take $500 million almost out of the state fisc. And then you have another $300 million coming out that's going into a new construction projects that's now coming from the vehicle sales tax. So the sales tax is set to go down. The best way to have done this is, if you're going to make a tax swap, is to trade the federal income tax deduction to cushion the blow of that sales tax reduction. Because I can tell you, I don't think there are going to be a lot of progressives or many people at all who are going to want to renew that sales tax. But when that day comes, it's going to happen right around the time when all of this, COVID money and all of this kind of post-hurricane reconstruction dollars are starting to peter out of the economy. And so it's not going to happen next year or the next couple of years, but pretty soon we're going to be back talking about these fiscal cliffs that we spent 4 or 5 years trying to avoid and dig our way out of. And I think the time to have done this and to really address this would have been this year. The legislature didn't do that. They decided that if we're going to take away an income tax deduction, it had to be taken, it had to be balanced by cuts in income tax rates. And again, I think, there are folks of goodwill on the other side who have philosophical reasons, and maybe that's the only thing that could have passed the legislature. I'll leave it to other people to decide that. But philosophically, we just think it doesn't address what we see as the problems with the tax code.
So, Jan, you mentioned that how our sales taxes are regressive. And, we say that all the time. Those of us who do this for a living, we kind of know what that means. But for the people, our participants who are here, who don't understand that, will you talk to them about how it adversely impacts people who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum?
Sure. Well, the first sales taxes in the country were born in the South, and it was an attempt by wealthy landowners to try to spread the cost of government onto people who didn't own land, who didn't own plantations, and so this is I think the one tax that kind of conservatives when they embrace taxes, and they don't often do it, it's sales taxes. The basic theory is that people with low incomes tend to spend every dollar that comes in, often on basic necessities. And so you pay a higher percentage of your income if you're a low income person on sales tax than somebody with a higher income who doesn't spend maybe only a fraction of their income. Now, Louisiana does have some progressive elements of its state sales tax. At the state level, we don't tax groceries, residential, utilities, or prescription drugs. So we do have, and those are constitutional features that I think are very good. They belong there and they shouldn't go away. There have been suggestions over time to get rid of those. So we do some things right, but those exemptions don't exist at the local level. And so when you add it all up, and there have been reports, the Institute, the ITEP, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, does a report that shows, by income group, what percentage of your income goes to pay state and local taxes. And we know that again, that's where we know that low income people pay a higher effective rate. Obviously, someone who makes $1 million a year pays a lot more in taxes than somebody who makes $15,000 a year. But when you talk about it as a percentage of income, it falls harder on low income families. And that's one of the issues we're trying to address. Robert, you want to jump in here?
I do. I actually want to agree with some of what Jan is saying, and maybe a little different perspective on it. And that's that, he's pointing out that some of the things that take the edge off of the state sales tax, or these exemptions on food and drugs and so on. And he said on the local level, that's not the case. Most local governments don't have that exemption. And you have to remember that the local tax by average in Louisiana is about 5%. In some municipalities, it's up like 6 and 7%. It's crazy, crazy big. And 5% is like the third highest local sales tax rate in the country, if you look at the averages. So, and what we don't have is we don't have a sort of proportional amount of property tax, which is a local tax, you know, that goes to these local governments. And I guess my suggestion, you know, would be to partly to Jan's issue, is that we focus a lot on the state sales tax portion of it, but really the more expensive part is the local, and the sales tax itself for the locals in many places is drying up, and other places it's very volatile. And a property tax, I think, would be a more appropriate and stable way to do it. When you look at the support for schools, public schools in Louisiana, local governments here, the property taxes support those at about half the national rate in Louisiana as they do in other states. So I would look towards that as a significant tax structure problem that we have. And I would suggest that would be the kind of trade-off that I would recommend.
Thank you so much, Robert. We have a lot of work to do. And, you know, my concern is that maybe the amendments that have been proposed are not quite ready for prime time. I mean, it seems that there needs to be a bit more work. I want to remind all of our lawyers who are participating with us today that we are approved for 1.5 hours of CLE. You do not have to pay for it. It's free for you attending this very important webinar. So please, if you want to receive CLE credit, put your name and your bar number in the chat, in the panelists, you know, directed to the panelists, and we'll protect your privacy, and we'll get you some CLE credit. So let's look at proposed amendment number 3. This amendment would essentially allow some levy districts to raise property taxes by $5 per 1,000 of assessed value for levy maintenance and construction. And the way that it's on the ballot, it says that it would allow levy districts created between January 1st of 2006 and before October 9th of 2021, whose electors approved the amendment. So it looks like it's only applicable to those jurisdictions or districts that actually approve it. So it could be approved in one district and not in another, and still those people would be taxed. Did I get that right? I'm going to start with you, Robert.
Okay, thanks a lot. This is a good example of things that probably shouldn't be in the Constitution, but it is, and so we're going to have to face up to it. You know, how levy districts go about having their millages on property tax to pay for what they do. Yeah, that it's in the Constitution, sort of the guidelines of how you have to do it. And that's why we have to vote on this, because since 2006, there have been 5 in particular levy districts that have been created that have not been given the sort of automatic 5 mil property tax that all the other levy districts before them got, right? And so they want to have that privilege too. Now, the way this is set up is basically everybody statewide is allowing these districts to have a local tax referendum. That's really what this boils down to mean, because this amendment, basically what it would do is it would say these 5 districts. Now, just real quickly, it's the Cheniere in Calcasieu, Cameron, Vermilion parishes, the Iberia Parish levy, the Squirrel Run levy district in Iberia, but St. Tammany levy district, a big one, and also the Tangipahoa levy district. Those are the ones that are really in question here. And their boards cannot automatically have a 5 mil property tax increase. They can go to the people and get a vote and get that if they want to. And so what this amendment would do is it would say, okay, you boards in those 5 districts, you can go up to 5 mils. Probably most of them wouldn't do it all overnight, but you can go up to 5 mils on the property tax to pay what you're going to do. And if you want more than that, you can go to the people and get more. That's basically what it does. And statewide, it has to pass. It has to pass by a majority statewide. And then in each of these districts, the voters in these districts have to vote in a majority in that district in order for it to be effective in their district. If they vote no in one of these districts, it doesn't kill the whole thing. It only kills it for them. So basically what you have here is it boils down to a local referendum. And if you're voting statewide, some people will say, well, I'll vote for it because I'll let the people in those districts decide rather than me decide for them whether they get their 5 mils.
Sort of like the
I hope that
gaming,
explains
like
it.
you did really good. So
Okay.
sort of like the gaming issue, right? It's
Yeah,
sports betting of the y'all know what I'm trying to say.
right.
The,
Where you're getting permission, you're letting each district seek permission to do this. That's what you're doing.
Melissa, you're on mute.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, well, I want to follow up and basically ask Robert a question of that, because the way I read this, there's nothing that precludes these levy districts going out and having local levy district votes on a millage without this constitutional amendment, is there?
They can do that, but when you talk to the people in these levy districts, they don't have the money to do what needs to be done to get an election standing up and doing that. Some of these are, especially the Chenier down there, they're having a lot of trouble with that. So, I think that's the argument that they would make. But they can go to the people. But the truth is, that's what this is. This is an election. This is a local referendum, really, as far as each of these levy districts is concerned, so long as it passes statewide too. And I don't know whether that will happen.
Yeah, but if you wanted to have a local, the reason I'm concerned about this is it seems like, once again, we're using a hammer when we really need to be using a screwdriver. That the local parishes or the local levy districts could have local elections. Why are we trying to have a statewide election that requires people to vote on this, that then is really only going to have an impact in these 5 particular jurisdictions?
Yep.
Once again, my concern is does this rise to the level of what a constitutional amendment should really be?
Great.
Thank you, Melissa. Ashley?
Yeah, I think I agree with Melissa on this one. I think it's also always problematic to me when the whole state gets to vote on other things for specific communities. And even though it says that if they vote no, that it won't affect them, it just still, again, it doesn't need to be in our Constitution. And it seems like there's certainly, again, a better way forward than what we have here. So again, no more needs to be said. I had nothing else to say about it, but yeah, it just shouldn't be here. We shouldn't have to be voting on this, and it certainly shouldn't be enshrined in the Constitution.
I just don't. Okay, Taryn and then Yon.
Really, same thing. A, it doesn't need to be in the Constitution. B, why is the entire state voting on something that would affect really and truly at its core these 5 districts? And B, the idea that it seems, C, in the idea that it seems convoluted, and that if the whole state either says yes or no, but if in that particular district, if not a majority of the people vote on it, then it's not amended. And is that really even clear to the people who are going to the voting booths? And so it's the idea that even if the whole state votes yes, but that particular district votes no, then it goes back to the idea that let that particular district just vote on it. And
so Taryn, doesn't that feel like totally contrary to what we learned in law school about special legislation? The legislature's not supposed to be doing that.
Absolutely not.
Anyway,
the mere fact that it almost lists the names, and we already know where this is,
because where is Squirrel Run? Robert, I never heard of Squirrel Run.
Let me just add one other thing, and a lot of times we'll have constitutional amendments that will really just affect 1 or 2 parishes, for example. And because that's how detailed it is, and especially in New Orleans, this is the case. And usually what happens is the way it's set up is if the local parish where it is affected, if they vote no or a statewide vote no, it doesn't pass. In this case, with this levy, this one's different. Each levy district can opt out because you have enough of them involved. They're not going to do the usual way. So you can opt out, but still pass the amendment. It would be interesting if it passed and all 5 of them said no. That would be fascinating.
It would just be fascinating. Jan?
I don't know if I have anything really to add on this. I will say, just on a personal level, I'll vote for flood protections, parks, libraries, and transit anytime you ask me to. So I think this is probably a good idea, but clearly this does point to the problems we have with cluttering our Constitution with things. But I don't think that's a reason to oppose it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're down to one, and we got about 9 minutes because I do want to allow you an opportunity to have some closing comments. I did not see any questions. Charlie, did you see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A? And I just want
I don't think there were any questions.
Okay, so that means you guys did a really good job because they're still here, they're still listening, but they don't have any questions. So let's look at proposed constitutional amendment 4. It proposes to increase the amount of allowable deficit reductions to statutory dedications and constitutionally protected funds from 5 to 10%. There are many budget items that are constitutionally protected, except for, wait for it, higher ed and healthcare. Oh boy, who gets to start this one?
I think I want to start this one, and I'm going to do a very bad thing. In law school, they say answer the call, the question. Yeah. And for this one, it's not really so much in my mind about, going from 5 to 10%. It's just the fact that there's dedications to begin with, and the messiness of it all, and how we have to find better ways to make sure that people can be healthy and be educated and also drive on good roads and also have great schools. And I don't know, I'll let one of the other panelists take over, but every time there is a financial crisis, I really think I'm old enough, but not too far removed to know what it's like to be that college student. And I did not come from a wealthy home. And in knowing that if higher ed is cut, that it's going to really and truly affect students.
So it just always boggled my mind that we would leave our education level and the health of our people so vulnerable. And so, Melissa, I'm going to come to you, and then I'm going to go to Ashley. Not intentional that I'm going to the ladies first, but Melissa, then Ashley, and then I'm going to come back around to Jan and Robert.
Yeah, I understand why we want to have more flexibility at the state level and I understand why we want to have the flexibility around dedicated funds, but we're just not going to cut our way to excellence. And so, my gut instinct is really to say no on this amendment because, I really do feel like we need to be more strategic and thoughtful about what we're funding and how we're funding it and what our investments are. And, I just am afraid that we're going to give them an opportunity at the legislature, who I obviously have little confidence in right now, to make wise decisions financially. So I guess I would think that we shouldn't pass this.
So Melissa, when you're thinking about it, doesn't it seem counterintuitive that we're looking at the only 2 pots of money that's left, as opposed to looking at everything globally and saying, maybe we need to get rid of some of these dedications, and that way we have more money to work with in order to meet the needs of the people of Louisiana?
Well, yes, that makes sense. But we've dedicated all these funds over the years, basically because we don't trust the legislature to protect these various pieces of the state budget. And so you've got an extra interest to try and dedicate the funds. I mean, I think it leads to a broader conversation around what are our government priorities? How do we fund the state government? You know, what level of flexibility do we have? But I'm just not sure saying, oh, let's cut more from the dedicated funds is going to actually force us to think more strategically and thoughtfully about our state budget decisions.
Thank you, Melissa. Ashley, you're on.
Yeah, I think Melissa captured it, and I think Taryn dropped it in the chat. You know, like, we can't cut our way to excellence. I mean, I think it's a perfect, perfect capture of the thought. And you know, and I think too that, again, I always go back to, historically, what leadership, where we've been at different times, over the course of my life, but also, more largely historically, that we just don't always make the best decisions, right? And I would be worried about, so under this current, with this current legislature, maybe one set of things would happen. With the next legislature in 2023, a different set of things could happen. And it just doesn't feel like we're solving, we're solving the problems of our state. And to Melissa's point, we're not going to cut our way to excellence. And so that's what I have on this particular one.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Jan?
Well, I think, as I said before, this is one of those amendments that if it passes, you hope it never has to be used, because what we're talking about here is what the legislature and the governor can do when there are mid-year shortfalls. The legislature puts together a budget based on their best educated guess of how much we're going to collect in taxes and how much it's going to cost us to run state government. And every year they're wrong. Nobody ever gets it perfectly right because it's a guess. And if you err, and if you end up with less tax revenue than you expect and more expenses, which is what happens when we have recessions, the legislature has to come in the middle of the year and cut the budget. And that's when the question of what happens to these dedicated funds comes in. In my experience, and it's only been about 18 years. I can't believe it's been 18 years. I think they've used the 5% flexibility that they have now once. Robert can probably correct me if I'm wrong. And we've gone through some really tough budget holes. The premise here, as others have said, is that we have very little of the state general fund is considered fully discretionary, where legislators have full control over it because we have protected so much. And that makes healthcare, and not all healthcare, because there are parts of the healthcare budget that are just as protected as the MFP or anything else. I'm looking at nursing homes in particular, who got a constitutional amendment passed a few years ago to protect their funding, which means people who get home care services are more vulnerable. So there are certain parts of the budget that are vulnerable to cuts, and especially when these mid-year cuts have to be made, because when the mid-year cuts have to be made, you don't have the same process that you do in the spring, where they go over the budget line by line and everybody has a chance to come and give testimony. It's usually done more in a back room kind of. It's just a joint legislative committee on the budget that does this. I agree with the suspicion of the legislature, but I also trust my better angels, and I think that giving the legislature a little bit more flexibility, if they should need it, is maybe not a terrible idea. But again, this is not one that has been a big focus for us at the Louisiana Budget Project.
Thank you so much, Sean. Robert, you get the last word on this one.
Sure, and just to follow up what Jan was saying, what the purpose of number 4 is really to give the governor more flexibility in an emergency situation, because there's nothing about number 4 that changes basically what a legislature can do in a regular session or a special session, for that matter, if it's the right one. So this is sort of for emergency measures. And it would basically take a mechanism that already exists, and it would double the amount that you could tap these various funds. Now, I'm really pretty neutral on this one. I'm not super high on it. I could give you the good government argument for it. I could give you the good government argument against it. There's not a perfect way of handling this. It's just really just kind of a judgment call. But I defer otherwise to everything else Jan said, because when I was in the Capitol as the Capitol Bureau Chief for the Times-Picayune working in the Capitol, Jan was working right there with me. And when he came in and started being a reporter, I said, guess who gets to cover the budget? It was him. And so he's the budget expert, I think, on this. So I'll go with his explanation.
Robert's responsible for all this trouble I've caused. So if you have any problems with anything the Louisiana Budget Project does or any of our positions, just blame Robert Scott.
He was trained at
If he would have put me on a different beat, I'd probably be in Kansas or someplace else by now.
I want to thank all of you. I want to be respectful of yours and our participants' time, but I want to thank all of you. Robert, the rest of them know that I call on them regularly. Now that you are in my database and I have your contact information, you just be ready, because I will be calling on you as well. But thank you to all of our guests, Representative Mandie Landry, who had to leave us early, but she was here and she came and brought good thoughts, and we really appreciate her being here. Jan Moller, who is the Executive Director of the Louisiana Budget Project, Robert Travis Scott, who is President of the Public Affairs Research Council, or PAR, Ashley Shelton, who is President and Executive Director of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, Dr. Melissa Flournoy, who is Chair of the Board of Directors and CEO of Louisiana Progress, and my own Miss Taryn Branson, Attorney Taryn Branson, who is also a community consultant with the Southern University Law Center's Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative. And thank you so very much to all of our participants who were here with us today. We appreciate you. We know that you gave your lunch break to spend time with us and to help yourselves to become more informed voters. And so we are very, very much appreciative of all of you being with us. Listen, write to us, text us, call us, email us. Let us know the issues that you want to hear about. We are, along with Louisiana Progress, are planning monthly forums to talk with you, particularly during the legislative session as it comes up, because we know that there are going to be issues that are of importance to you, and we want to try and help to bridge that gap. And Melissa, I do want to allow you an opportunity to say something on behalf of Louisiana Progress. I know you were a panelist today, but you are our partner, so.
Well, thank you, Alfreda, and thank you to all the presenters today. I do just want to remind folks that early voting starts October 30th through November 6th. Election day is November 13th. There are some local elections around the state, but the constitutional amendments are really one of the only statewide pieces of the puzzle on the ballot. And thank everyone for your commitment to trying to move Louisiana forward. So we appreciate you, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with the Southern University Law Center. So everybody have a great day. And I also want to end by saying thank you to Robert Travis Scott, who is retiring from PAR.
That's right.
And I just want to say thank you, Robert, for your years of service to Louisiana, the role PAR plays for Louisiana, and the important work yet to be done. And so thank you for your service. And we look forward to working with the new director, Dr. Stephen Procopio, when he takes the leadership reins. So
that's right. And he's actually qualified to do the job. So you'll be glad to see him.
Robert, just make sure that he knows that you're coming back to do the analysis for us on the constitutional amendments.
Right. I can't wait.
Thank you all so very much. And
Thank
have
you.
a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you, Charlie, for all your work.